Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for this webinar this evening with Connections in Mind and ADHD 360. We're going to be talking to you this evening about parenting children with ADHD. And in a moment, I'm going to introduce my co-host this evening, my collaborators, Phil and Lisa, who are going to be taking us through this evening. So I'm just going to let people file in. We've got over 250 people signed up today for this, so it might just take a few moments for people to file in, and it's almost like find their places, isn't it? It's like we're in an auditorium, an online one. Fabulous stuff. Good. I can see people flooding in, so that's super. We'll just get started with the introductions, I think. So should we go around the room? Phil, do you want to start us off with a little bit of an intro?
Hi, Phil Anderton. I'm the managing director of a small company called ADHD 360. We specialise in the assessment, diagnosis, treatment of people with ADHD. Our youngest patient is 4, our eldest patient is 76. We have about 1,200 patients on our caseload. We carry 4 NHS contracts, and we also see private patients. I've been in ADHD for 20 years. 20 years ago, I met this fantastic woman who shares a passion, shares the same goals as me with ADHD. I met her 20 years ago. I've never seen her since. So I opened the business I've never met before. And I'll introduce you to Lisa Mangle, who actually was that person from 20 years ago.
Hi, thanks, Phil. So I'm the clinical business director of ADHD 360. So I do everything patient focused and Phil does everything else. We work to our strengths at ADHD 360. So my day job is to assess, diagnose and treat patients across the lifespan for ADHD. I too have worked with this amazing group of people for 20 years. Starting in the NHS and then moving through to setting up what Phil and I do for the last few years now. I'm really proud of what we've achieved, and I love my job. It's not a job really, it's a hobby and I love it. So Victoria, over to you.
Oh, thanks so much, Lisa. It's such a pleasure to have you both on this webinar this evening. So my name is Victoria Bagnall, and I am the Managing Director of Connections in Mind. We are an organisation which is dedicated to raising awareness about some brain functions that are attributed to many of the neurodiverse traits we see in things like ADHD and dyslexia, autism, etc. These are our executive functions, and they're found in our prefrontal cortex, so the bit of our brain behind our forehead, and they help us do things like regulate our emotions, inhibit our responses to stimuli, for things that kind of set us off. They help us to manage our time, help us to keep organized, and generally just help us to do the kind of things that everyday life kind of requires. And they can wax and wane, so they're not fixed. So you can have really strong executive functions one day and really have challenges with your executive functions another day, because they're linked to things like sleep, nutrition, exercise, and doing things that are restorative for us. So we need to look after our brains in order for them to be working optimally. So that's me. It's great to have you online. So we're going to be focusing today on parenting children with ADHD, and we want to get you guys really involved in the audience. So we've got just under 60 of you on the line now, and we'd really love to see you getting involved in the chat. And asking any questions that you have as they come up. So what are your burning questions that you'd like us to answer? So you can pop them in the chat at any time, and we will get to those as we go through, and we might pick them up if they're relevant to what we're talking about at the moment, or we might come onto them in a little while, but we'll keep an eye on that. So who wants to kick off and talk to us a little bit about their experience of parenting children with ADHD, just to get us started? Phil and Lisa.
Oh, wow. Okay. let's go straight to that. I think what we've got to look for, in our children is something that I came across in America 19 years ago from a guy called Bob Brooks. And I think sometimes we forget to look for what we need to build positively in our children, because they're the guys going through the challenges, the hardship, the pain, and the suffering. And yes, as parents, we feel that, and we get to the end of our tether, and it grinds us down day after day. But I think sometimes we can lose sight of the young person that actually is in the middle of this. And Bob Brooks says you should find the child's island of competence and find out what they're really good at and what they like to do. And come what may, no matter what, encourage having that kind of perspective. I'm just going to stop for a second if I can. Jodie, the screen's working fine for me here. Jodie's having trouble with the blackout screen. I don't think that's from this end, because I think the videos are working well. Victoria, would you say? Perhaps just
yeah,
need a bit of feedback.
Everything seems to be fine. Is anyone else just pop it in the chat if you're having problems with a blank screen? Just do let us know, because obviously we'll work on that. But Jodie, it might just be from your end. Everyone's saying it's all good for them, so I think we're good to go. Jodie,
so sorry, Jodie.
Log off and log back on again. Maybe that could be just a glitch in the system.
Done it. Okay, so back to Bob Brooks' Island of Competence. And after what we talk about in terms of throughout the hour, looking at the challenges of dealing with children with ADHD, I'd just like us all to just have that kind of thing in the back of your mind that actually, if we can remember what it is, or find out or discover what our child really likes and wants to do, and start to give them that opportunity, make that opportunity, positiveness, happiness, freedom, all those things that can be lost in the maelstrom of negativity and the challenges of ADHD, we can actually start to turn things around a fair bit. And I hope, Victoria, to start on that kind of positive message for the evening can be something that we maybe return to at the end, because it's all too easy to talk about meltdowns, violence, stroppiness, and all those things that are some of the challenges. But we have got a young person in the middle of this, and we need to actually find out what makes them click, what makes them happy, and no matter what, as the adult, take that responsibility to push for that.
I think that's a really good shout, Phil, because when I assess children and young people for ADHD, it's very easy when you're doing an assessment to focus on the negative things, because obviously the families are there because there's something tricky that's going on that they need help with. But we're all good at something, so I generally start the assessment with, let's talk about what you're really good at. Tell me what you like about, tell me what your skill set is, what are your hobbies, passions, that kind of thing, because we're all good at something. And I read something a while ago about by the age of 12, children with ADHD have 20,000 negative comments. And it really shocked me, because for a child's self-esteem to remain exactly where it is now, they need 10 lots of positive praise for every negative, and that's an awful lot of positive praise that a child needs to hear. So it is about looking at those things that the child's really good at and milking it, really working it, and looking at those strengths. What are they good at in school? What are they great at home? Because then you can work with that. You can really work with that and use that towards the praise and reward system, looking at what that child's really good at.
I remember a number of years ago where there was a school assessment by a paediatrician going on with the young child in the classroom, and the teacher came over to the paediatrician at the end of the session and said, how did that go? And the paediatrician said, oh yeah, can see what's going on here. Do you know how many times you told Billy off in the lesson? And the teacher said, well, I genuinely didn't tell Billy off at all in the lesson. It wasn't like that. And the pediatrician said it was something like 52 times in that lesson. There were expressions like, Billy, don't do that. Billy, stop doing that. Billy, sit down. Billy, sit still. And we often, if we talk about challenges of bringing up a child with ADHD, it is that ability to self-reflect on what the messaging is we're putting over. And as you say, Lisa, if there's a high degree of negative comments, the impact of that on self-esteem is just quite incredible. And if we are part of a collective that is pushing down the young person's self-esteem, we are not helping them to be able to tackle their own personal challenges. And we see in clinic a heck of a lot. And perhaps, Lisa, you can talk about this a little bit, about the biggest challenge that is there is maintaining the child's self-esteem so they actually can still believe in themselves.
Absolutely.
Because that's something that plummets from about the age of 6.
It does.
And we need to do more with that.
And it's one of the questions I always ask, tell me about your confidence. How do you feel in relation to your peer group? And hardly ever is a child with ADHD confident or feel that they're good in comparison to their peers. And I find that really sad, because my patient population are just brilliant. They are the creative, dynamic, quick thinking, outside the box people who turn into the most wonderful adults, successful adults, if they're nurtured in the right way. But they don't often see that, and when I used to do when I worked in the NHS and I did parenting groups, for want of a better word, after diagnosis, one of the sessions I used to run, I devoted to the parent being the child's advocate. It is your job to stick up for your child, because if you don't do it, no one else is going to do it. By the end of it, I used to talk about a day in the life of your child, from the minute they woke up to the minute they went to sleep, and what that child had to deal with throughout the day. And without a doubt, I used to sit a box of tissues in the table on purpose in front of me, because I wanted the parents to really get it and really understand it from the child's perspective. And I used to start with, I have no doubt that your life is tough a lot of the time, but let's just think about your child and where they sit. And certainly this year, it's been incredibly difficult for our young people with ADHD, who don't do change, don't like to know what's happening, like the rules and boundaries, and it's just all being thrown up in the air and changing on a daily basis, if not an hourly basis sometimes. So it is about, really being that advocate for your child and really focusing on those positive things, and the things like Phil said that our kids are just so good at.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to come to the neuroscience part on that as well, because as I mentioned earlier, our executive functions, which are the brain processes that kind of underlie a lot of the traits that we see in ADHD, are only working optimally when a young person is feeling safe and secure and nurtured. So if they're feeling attacked, if they're feeling they're not good enough, if they're feeling low self-confidence, the possibility of them to be able to improve their executive functioning, to be able to emotionally regulate and to inhibit their responses to things that might trigger them, is going to be depleted. So if we're not focusing on giving them that lovely, safe environment where they feel safe, they feel nurtured, they feel supported, then then that can spiral out. This is not a judgment. We're not sitting here saying you parents are doing, you're doing the bad job. Everyone is trying their very hardest to support young people who are going through really difficult times. And sometimes the school environment can be, not particularly nurturing for these young people, because lots of schools don't understand the challenges that these young people are going through. But at home over the summer, creating that space where they can feel safe and supported, giving them a chance to recoup some of that energy that they've lost just trying to keep up with their peers over the last academic year and all the challenges that they faced, is a really important part of it. And that can be hard, because sometimes the things that they do to be restorative might not be the things that you ideally want them to do as a parent. It might be playing computer games, it might be watching YouTube a lot. Doesn't mean they have to do it all day long, but that might be the things that they need in order to restore themselves. So maybe we could move on to thinking about that. What kind of things we can encourage young people with ADHD to do during the holidays that can help them and support them in their development, without kind of causing more challenges at home. What would you say on that, guys?
There's as you were talking there about school, Victoria, something came to mind, and then there's been a message put up that actually fed into exactly what I was thinking. And one of the challenges, if we could stick with challenges for a second, if we may, is where school are saying they see nothing that's ADHD-esque in the child in the school setting, and they come home and we get anxiety about going back to school, we get anger, we get meltdown, I don't like that word, but we get emotional dysregulation at home. And a lot of parents don't understand the dichotomy, the difference between what's going on and reported at school and what they're seeing at home. And I think that's just worth unpicking just for a second for the benefit of parents. Maybe if you do create that environment where your child feels safe and nurtured, and you've got that support for your child, it will be the place where they are honest with their emotions. And if that means emotional dysregulation, that's because they feel safe, and that's that honesty. And if they can't be themselves at school, and some people will call it masking, I think it's bloody hard work for them, and they're doing what they can to stay out of trouble, and they get home and they're knackered and they can't do it anymore, and they feel safe enough to just go bleh in whatever way. I think we have to just recognize what's going on there. And that's a message to the school that schools don't always see, is that this masking thing is not masking at all. It's trying, the child is trying the best to actually be the best they can, but there's a limit to how often and for how long they can do that. And we need, things like videoing the child at home, so that we can actually take that back to the school, the Senko or whoever, and say, well, you tell me what I've done wrong here, because this is what I've been facing with. And don't tell me they've even got ADHD, because is my child achieving their potential, or are they just doing enough to keep out of trouble at school? And, one of the challenges of bringing up a child with ADHD, I genuinely feel is that the school setting can very easily is very easily accepting actually they have the potential to be way above average, and good enough is not good enough, and we need to press for more. I'll tell you a quick tale and then hand you over to Lisa to just discuss the book that she's about to put in front of the screen. I can see. I had a patient ring and talk about her child being an A grade conversationalist and a C grade in exams, and felt that was the best explanation that they could give for their child not achieving their perspective. Now at school, the child achieving C grade in exams was good enough, but that child was capable of A grades in exams. And I think we should be looking at what our child's potential is and fighting and advocating for that as much as possible. And if I take if I take that and flip it over with a couple of the comments that I'm just reading here to close out on that subject, it can work in reverse, of course it can, where the behaviour at school is extremely problematic, but less so at home. And that's the flip side of the coin. And that's probably because someone, the culture, the way of being, whatever it is at school, is pushing the buttons for that child. And that child feels so insecure that they have to fight, they have to push back, rather than being able to admit they don't know, they can't follow the lesson, they can't keep up. And they're being pushed into a challenging situation, a challenging scenario, where rather than being able to feel confident about putting the hand up and saying, I'm sorry, miss, I just can't concentrate on that, and I've lost the train of thought, and your question to me, I just can't answer it, because that's something that would come from an adult. the child can't articulate that, then you'll get behaviours to mask and hide their insecurity and their anxiety over where they are. So we do see both sides of the story in the classroom, and we should be aware of both. Lisa is so desperate to show you this book. I'll hand over to Lisa. Go on, Lisa.
Well, I'm very passionate about ADHD and girls, in fact, ADHD and females in general. So there's a couple of questions about girls. So I'm going to recommend this book called Understanding Girls with ADHD. It's by a couple of authors, but one of them is a lady called Patricia Quinn, and she is the global expert on ADHD and females. And in the back of it, there's a set of questionnaires, one for children and one for teenagers. And so if you've got any children or parents who are a bit skeptical about your daughter or female relative having ADHD, because girls often, this is the ballpark, often present differently to boys, look at the questionnaires, because there's about 150 questions, but I think you'll be surprised how many your daughter will tick the boxes of. And actually, I'm a bit of a highlighter when I come to reading books. So I highlight or underline the relevant bits. And as you can see, I've literally underlined everything. So I gave up then, because really the whole book is incredible. So I definitely recommend that, Understanding Girls with ADHD. And then I'm going to jump in before Victoria does with the Smart But Scattered book. And there's a teenage version of it, Smart But Scattered, A Guide to Success by Peg Dawson. I must recommend this book about 5 times a day. But you can look at executive functioning, but it will then give tips and tricks to your teenagers on how they can actually help with their education and their learning. And I think it's certainly something that's worth doing for your teenage, I don't know your name because you're anonymous, but your teenager over the summer. So it's something that you could do an executive functioning questionnaire, look at the 3 deficits and be working on those over the summer, so you've got a bit of a head start for September, and let your teenager be part of that. It's dead easy questionnaire, and it's got really simple tips and tricks, and you only need to read the 3 sections in the book that are the weakest areas to begin with, but there's some really good easy solutions to certain parts of your executive functioning weaknesses. So I think that's a good place to start in terms of learning support for those who've got ADHD.
Yeah, it's such a great yeah, go for it.
I was sorry, Victoria, just want to pick up something before it disappears from the right-hand side of the screen. And if we get into another subject, it'll be gone. There's a couple of parents commenting here that it's very difficult to convince anybody that it is ADHD if the school don't agree. Yeah. And a lot of NHS clinicians saying it can't be ADHD if the school don't see it. I'm just going to say this as it comes to my mind, and I want every one of the 72 people to write this down. Nowhere in national or international guidelines on assessing ADHD and diagnosing somebody with it does it bloody mention that a school has to agree. The job of assessing and diagnosing ADHD is a clinical job. It is not an educational job. And the fact that the school or the SENCO do not agree with a diagnosis by a professional clinician does not matter a hoot. You do not need the school's agreement, acquiescence to be able to diagnose, because most teachers are not clinicians. And anybody who's got that pushback at all from school or from the NHS saying, well, school don't agree, there's nothing we can do, just refer them back to their own bloody guidelines, because it does not say that you need school to dictate that it is ADHD or not. I'm sorry if that's a bit too passionate, but there's a number of comments here about the school not agreeing. I don't give a flying fig whether or not the school agree or not. What I want them to do is change the way they teach the child who has a diagnosis of ADHD. That's their job. It is not their job to move their role into a clinical setting. Sorry, Victoria, but there was just so much in the chat there about that. I want people to feel that passion, because that passion is actually based on legislation. It's absolutely based on the national and international rules and regulations. It does not say that school have to be on board. And any school that wants to challenge you or me, bring it on. So there was one of the parents that said that, you know, my son's a patient of yours, Phil, and school don't see it. Get me the name of the person that doesn't see it, and I'll be onto the phone to them. And believe me, it will not be a very nice conversation, because they've no right to step in and stop medicine. End of.
Just to back that up as well, you know, I hear that a lot. Oh, the teacher doesn't see the ADHD. And I will say in the assessment, okay, so when you were in primary school, did you go to the toilet a lot when you didn't need the loo? Did you offer to do jobs? Did you sharpen your pencil all the time? Did you fidget with your pencil case? Did you jiggle your legs under the table? And I can see the child's face lighting up as if I've been stalking them for the past 5 years, because that's hyperactivity in a child in the classroom. Now, a teacher won't see that. None of those things to a teacher scream ADHD. They just think it's a child throwing a chair or being purposefully disruptive. They don't see that child who's trying to do the right thing, but I can't, so I'm going to do these, you know, activities instead that are socially acceptable. A teacher would never pick that out as ADHD, but that is exactly how ADHD will present in the classroom. So I echo everything that Phil's just said.
Yeah, there's so much work to be done, isn't there? I think we all agree this, in educating, you know, education professionals, and also some healthcare professionals and counsellors and people who don't understand, you know, these elements of the executive functioning too. Because often, if you go to therapy to someone who isn't aware of kind of executive functioning things, they can also get into the whole, oh, why are you doing that? What happened in your childhood that means that you're, you know, forgetful about something? Well, it's nothing to do with that. Actually, it's to do with the fact that you have working memory challenges, and that you need to work on that. So it's really important to make sure that when we get support, we do it with people who have got expertise in these areas, and really do understand the neuroscience and do have experience of working with neurodiverse children. Or adults, if you're looking for adult support as well. And that's what we provide at Connections in Mind in terms of our coaching. And I was just going to kind of come on to that, Lisa, because you're talking about Smart but Scattered, which is kind of our Bible, and how we kind of set up Connections in Mind. And it is just such a great book. But a lot of people, they read it and they say, well, this is just basic stuff. It is basic stuff. But what the people that we are working with are facing, the challenge they face, it's easy for some people, but it's not easy for other people. It's really hard. And just like it's easy to speak French for some people, it's easy to ride a bike for some people, you need to learn that skill, and you need to develop that skill over time. And that takes effort, and it takes regular repetition, and it takes support of someone who knows what they're doing to do that. And it won't happen through osmosis. It doesn't just happen naturally for everybody. And so our campaign is to make sure that every single classroom has an executive function approach, is developing those skills in every single young person from the beginning of school, so that there's no child that is not developing those skills in a safe, nurturing environment, where it's okay to find it difficult to get started on a task, where it's okay to feel distracted in the middle of a lesson, where it's okay to occasionally lose control of your emotions, but not to, you know, it's not okay to lash out and hit someone. There are acceptable ways of getting rid of that emotion, all sorts of strategies and things that you can use, where it's acceptable and normal to have challenges in these areas, because it's a human thing. It's not to do with ADHD and autism, dyslexia. We can all lose control of our executive functions at different times. And we've all done it, right? We've all had the red mist come down, and we've done something or said something that we shouldn't have done. And that's just when we're moving into that fight or flight part of our brain, which is when our executive functions aren't doing the job of regulating our more instinctual part of our brain.
There's a couple of comments here, Victoria, from teachers, and you know, it's nice to see a teacher sort of saying, hey, hang on, it's not all bad in teaching. And I think we have to acknowledge that, and we do. But there's also some comments from teachers saying, we don't get any training on this, and therefore it's really, really tough. The offer that Lisa and I will make to any teacher, to any school, And to any of you who are parents with a school that is full of flat earth people that don't believe this exists, we will take them through a training program free of charge at their convenience whenever they want it. That's an unequivocal message that we offer every GP and every school. And the take-up rate is ridiculously low. Every single GP we write to, we offer that to. And schools, the same. So that offer is there. Make the most of it. If you've got a school that is full of people who think the earth is flat and your child has not got ADHD, take in the globe, whiz it round and say, these guys, 360-degree approach will help you understand it more. And we will, for nothing, and in a good way, not in a combative way. We'll deliver that training. Where we have done it, it's been extremely well received.
Absolutely. And just on that, someone was asking whether this is going to be recorded. It's absolutely being recorded, and everyone will get a copy of the recording, a link to the recording after this. So if you do want to forward it on to an SEN department, please do so. But please, be careful about how you send that on as well. Obviously we don't want people feeling like we're against them, and that's not what we're trying to say here. We recognize is that there is a skills deficit within the teaching community, and people need the knowledge to understand that these are not character traits. They're not character flaws. This is to do with the way that the brain is wired, and it can be developed in a nurturing, supportive environment where everyone understands exactly what's going on in these young people's brain. But punishing them and shaming them in to changing their behavior is not the way to do that. And I don't know about you, Phil and Lisa, but I've been quite upset by what's going on with the government at the moment with this kind of zero tolerance behavior policy that they're trying to push through at the moment. And I really recommend to everyone here I'll put the link in the chat in a minute. If you agree with us that kind of zero tolerance approach to behavior within schools is not what we need to help support young people, please do get involved in the consultation that they're running at the moment. They've done it in the middle of the summer holiday so that teachers don't know it's happening, but we need lots and lots of evidence, lots of support for people that we need to nurture and support young people, not lock them in removal rooms and remove them from school and exclude them in a kind of zero tolerance approach. Sorry, on my soapbox again there, Paul.
There was a mum talking about her daughter in the comments there, Victoria, saying, my daughter's got her A levels next May. What can I do to help her? You have got so much time to get on top of this and turn this around for your daughter. Get her into assessment, get diagnosis and get treatment. Get that done before the summer holidays, so you've got the summer holidays to adjust to things as a family, build that resilience, build that self-esteem, so that when your daughter goes back in September, she's got that run up to May where she can perform to the best of her capability. And I'm telling you that in very clear message, because you can absolutely turn around her struggles with her studies by May with consummate ease. Now it's down to you not to procrastinate over it. Get on with it as the parent and make things happen. And if your NHS waiting list doesn't accommodate your daughter's needs, then the obvious but simple, often inappropriate answer is to go privately. You should look at how you can do that, because there are many different offerings across the country that can help you, and it's worth investing in your daughter in this last year of her school academic career. It's worthy of making that investment. Can I pick one more question out, Victoria?
Yeah.
And I'll bring Lisa into this in a second. Lisa, it's about children lying and swearing black was white, and I didn't do that. And it goes back to something that Victoria said, and an anchor point that we all feel in society is that when somebody contravenes the behavioural code, they are doing that on purpose through choice. And the biggest learning I ever had right at the back of the start of my ADHD work 20 years ago was actually that's not the case. Many, many, many transgressions of our behavioural code, the criminal code, whatever it is, the house rules, schools rules, is not done on purpose. And then when the challenge to why somebody has done that or what they've done, why did you choose to do that? I didn't choose to do that, so therefore I haven't done that. And then you slap onto that a low self-esteem of the child not wanting to admit, bloody hell, this has gone wrong, flipping heck. so they don't want to admit it because they'll feel even lower than they do. And you get into this virtuous circle where we're saying to someone, you've done something wrong, I didn't mean to, but I don't know how to tell you I didn't mean to, or I didn't choose to, and I just did it impulsively. You know, people talk about impulsivity with ADHD, like throwing a pencil across a classroom. No, it's not about that. It's about more fundamental decision making, not being based on the same rationale for everybody. And as you say, Victoria, in the classroom, if a child is poorly, and let's use that word safely, if a child is poorly and can't control their behaviours the same as the person sat next to them, it is not their fault. It is for school to bring out the best in them and alter the way that we deal with them to try and make that transgression happen less and less and build that confidence. And we chatted, Lisa, tell the tale, if you will, about the kids who misbehave in school rather than get caught out for not following the teacher's lesson, and how often in clinic we get told that.
Yeah. So, you know, a lot of my patients literally cannot follow a set of instructions that a teacher is giving, and there's a lot of chalk and talk still happens in the classroom, not always as creative as our children prefer, because our children are very, very creative, very kinesthetic learners. And, you know, if they don't know what they should be doing, they would much rather just kick off and get kicked out of the lesson than actually say, you know, I don't know what I should be doing. You know, it's really tricky to be able to focus. And there's also another comment here about hyperactivity in my head. So, and it ties into this story about lying, that a lot of people, children and adults with ADHD, will give you a story of what's happened, and you know, as the person without ADHD, that couldn't possibly have happened in that order. It's just not possible. But people with ADHD are not very good at following an order. So they may have given you a scenario or a story as to what's happened in completely the wrong order. And that's the same when they're arrested as well. So they're not very good at giving a story that can be true, even though it is true, but in the wrong order. So that hyperactivity in the head is real. And you know, I often describe this internal hyperactivity as a little bit like having a laptop open with about 20 different tabs on it. So actually they've got 20 different things going on in the head at any one time, and they can dip in and out of different thought points. So actually providing a story that is real in its timeline is really difficult, because their head's been all over the place. So they're not necessarily externally hyperactive, but internal hyperactivity is a massive problem for my patients, and therefore they're not very good at always giving a scenario that's happened within its timeline. Yeah. So
we've had a couple of questions here about medication, and we could literally spin this whole webinar on its head and spend the rest of the time talking about medication, which I think would be inappropriate because of what this has been billed at. But I think if we were to put it in the context of the challenges of bringing up a child with ADHD, and one of those challenges is understanding the medication, I think the snapshot of that, which can be developed perhaps, Victoria, in another webinar as we come through kind of the summer break, as it were, is that all of this stuff we're talking about, executive functioning, behavior, hyperactivity, and other things, it's all because something is occurring in the brain that is either a chemical change that's not quite right, or the electricity in the brain isn't quite right. And a very, very, very learned psychiatrist sat me down many years ago and said, Phil, what you've got to understand about the brain is it is only a muscle full of chemicals and electricity, and there is nothing more to it than that. It just happens to be the most complex muscle in the world, in life, in the universe, and it's all about electricity and chemicals. So the medicine, for the mums that have asked about medicine, what the medicine does is adjust the chemicals so that we actually get the brain working properly. And it's that subtle adjustment in the prefrontal cortex of the brain that is what medicine tries to do. Diabetes medicine tackles a particular part of the body. Painkillers, it's a particular part of the pathway, and so on and so on. We could do an hour on medicine quite easily. I'm very excited to do it. The thing I would ask you in terms of the challenge of understanding the medicine, just understand that it's either chemicals or electricity that are letting things go awry. What we've got to do is adjust those. And the ways with ADHD is to adjust the chemicals. And it's not all with medicine and only medicine. Exercise, therapy, all those things are all there as part of an overall solution. Don't misunderstand me. But the most effective thing for ADHD in a child is an appropriate medicine delivered in an appropriate way by a skilled clinician such as Lisa, the right medicine in the right dose at the right time. And it's a game changer. It just ticks things over to make them right. And the challenge for a parent, I believe, is to ignore the Daily Mail, ignore all the hype and nonsense that you read on the internet, and do what your clinician tells you to do. Go with your clinician's advice and see what difference it can make.
Thanks for that, Phil. Yeah, I think, really good to get into that. And I've made a note that we should schedule a specific webinar on medication, because we get a lot of those questions in these webinars. I've just got one here about that I've seen coming up about somebody who's got the child's got 20 tabs open on their computer, and the parent can see that this is going to be distracting for the young person, and the young person's pushing back saying they need them open. And that's leading to obviously a discussion and maybe some disagreement and some friction at home. So I'm just coming at it from kind of an executive function coaching perspective. It's really hard as a parent when we see our children making mistakes. And our role as parents is not to tell them what to do, because they will push back against that because they're teenagers, but in fact to sit them down, talk them through our way of thinking about it, and then help them to make a decision that is the right one for them. Now, if they make a decision, given all the information, that is one that is still having 20 tabs open, we need to respect that and let them discover these things for themselves. But we cannot, I think Russ Barkley puts this really well, we cannot engineer our children. We can only shepherd them in a way that gives them all the things that they need to thrive, and help them to make sensible decisions. But we cannot make those decisions for them and impose things onto them. So we can make sure they're well fed, that they've slept well, that they've, in a safe environment, that they've, in an environment that's good for them in terms of their learning and so on and so forth. But we cannot make decisions for them. And I think we need to step back as parents, and we need to help them to develop the skills to make decisions that are sensible for them. I have a 9-year-old who doesn't have an ADHD diagnosis, but she has some severe executive function challenges around her emotional control. And she's 9, and she just decides her own bedtime within the boundaries of she can between 8 and 8:30 is her bedtime, and she can decide her bedtime based on how she's been in terms of her emotional regulation that day. So she gets to self-evaluate how she's doing, and she knows that her ability to self-regulate is based on the amount of sleep that she has, and she can recognize that in herself now. And so giving her the tools as young as 9 to start developing that, it takes time over the years to do that, but it's really, really beneficial to start giving them the autonomy from a really young age, so that they can make these decisions and self-reflect on their own challenges and know themselves better, because then they're more able to self-advocate as they get older. I'm just going to put a link in the chat now also to our parent course as well that we have at Connections in Mind, and which takes you through the neuroscience of executive functioning and how we can work together with young people to help them to develop strategies that really work for them. So I'll pop that in here. It's an online course over 6 weeks.
There's a question here about how many mums with ADHD daughters have it themselves. Well, ADHD is highly hereditary, so it's more hereditary than your hair and your eye colour. So if you have a child with ADHD, then they've got it from somewhere. So what we do at ADHD 360 is something called pedigree. So if I'm assessing a child, I'm always thinking about the siblings and the parents, and maybe the grandparents as well. If I'm assessing an adult, I'm always thinking about relatives or children, because if I'm working with a patient, I'm not going to help that patient 100% if I'm not helping the rest of the family. So actually in this scenario, I recently assessed a girl, an 8-year-old girl, and it was very clear that her mum had undiagnosed ADHD. And this mum was key to the success of this young girl. So we ended up putting a pause on her daughter's journey because I needed to help the mum first. So I ended up assessing the mum, diagnosing the mum, treating the mum, and only when the mum began to feel better did I then move on to treating the daughter. And I think it's really important that mums and dads put their own oxygen on first before we start looking at the child. And as a mum, you always want the best for your children, but the best for your children is often sorting you out first. So absolutely, if you recognise the symptoms in yourself as you do in your child, then yes, have a look. And 48 is a spring chicken. I assessed a 76-year-old a few weeks ago, and I actually thought his date of birth was wrong because he'd written on his documents, we always get information in advance, that his marriage was teetering. And I obviously thought, he's got the wrong date of birth here, he must be younger, and he wasn't. And he was 76, and for a variety of reasons, his life had changed because of COVID. And but then when I assessed him, he said, Lisa, the last 60 years for me have been really tough. I thought 60 years, that's longer than I've been alive. And I just went, well, let's make the next 25, happy. And that's exactly what we've done. And we've worked around his existing conditions. And his life has just completely changed, and his wife's really happy. And so no, 48 is absolutely not too old. Give yourself some time.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Lisa. We really do have to, as parents, we do have to put our oxygen masks on first, whether it's on the kind of medium term, like you were talking about, in terms of getting ourselves sorted and ourselves stable first, but also in the macro, like in the micro moment. It's really important that if our child is kicking off, then that often triggers us, because we see in maybe some of the things in ourselves that we were like, oh gosh, that kind of behavior, I used to do that or something, and it can often trigger us too and help us to lose control of our emotions. And so if we start yelling at our child, that's not going to help them to regulate. So we need to learn our own techniques to, whether it's breathing, mindfulness, being present in the moment, whatever it is, that it helps us to regulate ourselves, to get back into that, where our executive functions are switched back on again, so that we can be rational before we then start trying to help our young people. And we need to do that in every interaction as well. And that's really, really hard, because it just is triggering. Being a parent is triggering, and we need to recognize that. And if we ignore that, if we go about life thinking that, just because I'm a parent, I've got it under control all the time, then we're kind of detaching ourselves from being a human, because everybody loses control of their emotions every day. And we it's how we learn to overcome that, and how the boundaries that we have and the strategies that we have that help us keep ourselves and other people safe. Really important.
Is it worth, Victoria, just, we've got not long left here. We've got into some quite sophisticated discussions. Perhaps we could just whiz back to some basics for a second, in terms of the challenges of ADHD, and some quick fire things for attendees, parents, teachers, people with ADHD, to just go back to basics with. The first one is, if you can imagine the word ADHD sitting in a triangle, and each side of that triangle represents a different part of management of yours or your child's ADHD. The first one is diet. The amount of patients that we have who are overdosing on caffeine, chocolate, poor gut health caused by a poor diet, and you've got to address diet. ultimately you've got to address diet to get the most out of managing your ADHD. The next one is exercise. Exercise changes the brain chemicals positively for people with ADHD. In years gone by, we would walk to school, now we get a lift. We would have games every day, now we perhaps don't. We would play football, cricket, rugby, beating each other up in the playground. It didn't matter, we were getting exercise regularly. It doesn't happen so much now. The regularity of exercise is a key to managing ADHD, managing our executive functioning, and actually burning off some excess energy. So you can never have too much exercise. And if your child won't exercise, then I believe it's the parent's responsibility to go with them, walk the dog, go for a run, go for a bike ride, go for a swim. Doesn't matter what it is. Join them, encourage them, do it together, make it happen. And you've got to get exercise, you've got to get diet. And the last one, which is something that is huge for Lisa and I clinically, is sleep. And your sleep hygiene has to be absolutely top notch. We all, if we think about ourselves, if we're not getting enough sleep, we are little buggers. That's us. I'm 50 odd, and if I don't get enough sleep, I'm grumpy. I'm really, really grumpy. Now, if your child's not getting enough sleep, day in, day out, night in, night out, they're going to be grumpy. It's not going to help. So there's things that you can do in relation to sleep pattern, and dark room, no mobile phone, no TV. We were working with a sleep consultant a month or so ago, a medical consultant at a major London hospital, who said there are only two things that should happen in a bedroom. They are sleep and sex. Anything else is banned. Now, obviously for children, one of those is on the table, but televisions, even doesn't have in bed. No game console, no iPad, no telephone, blackout blinds, a bath or something before bed to help relaxation. Unless you've got all of those things into place, your sleep hygiene actually nailed, complete with the right diet and an exercise program, whatever treatment profile you have for ADHD, whether it's medication, therapy, or whatever it is, doesn't stand a chance unless you get those parts of the triangle in place. And we strongly, strongly urge and advocate everybody to get their ADHD triangle boxed off, and then you can see what you're left with to deal with. It's really important that we go back to those basics, and if we lose those basics, we actually are pushing water uphill right from the get-go.
Yeah, they're so foundational, and I think a lot of what we've been saying today is there's a lot of foundational work that needs to be done to help young people. And I wonder if we could also if we could go around and maybe just have like one key strategy each that we found that to be really effective at helping parenting with children with ADHD just before we end. So I'm just trying to think of my one now. There's many of them. We've mentioned quite a few of them already, but I think one of the key ones for me is the power of empathy, and that we can't really, as parents, really connect with our children, which is what they really need when they're dysregulated and when they're really struggling with their executive functions, unless we really empathize and we can feel with them about how they're feeling, how it's feeling unfair or frustrating, or they're angry, or whatever it is, the emotion that they're feeling. So getting into their shoes and feeling the emotion with them is a really great way of helping them to regulate and helping them to move through difficult emotions they might be having, or finding it difficult to concentrate or get started on a task. Just really empathizing with them about how hard it really is a great way to get started on helping them to develop a strategy or helping them to move through those difficult things that they're finding. So empathy is my top tip.
Oh gosh, put me on the spot now. I think for me it's about making it real for the kids, because there's so much out there that makes other people look perfect, that I think actually making it real for your children and actually talking about the things that you find difficult, the mistakes you've made at school, the things that you were really bad at and that you just struggled with, because often kids see us as oh, we've got it all sorted and we've had this perfect life and never struggled and never been bullied and never failed an exam. And, you know, so actually talking to your children about all those things that you've done that you've got wrong, I think sometimes makes them realise that it's okay just to make mistakes and to fail an exam and fail your driving test and all those things. So I think, yeah, just keeping it real and moving away from this perfect life where everybody's photos are pristine and they've all done amazing things, because we don't talk about the things that have gone wrong. So yeah, that would be my top tip. What about you?
Wow. I guess you two just take the top two off my list. One of the things we like to do, Lisa and I at 360, is write papers for parents and patients. And on our website, obviously these are free, there are a number of papers, and one of them is on control, and control of the child, control of the patient. And I've got that up in front of me. And one of the key messages we have in there is about parents being consistent. And it's really, really hard for you to keep a level playing field and be consistent when you're battling against everything from every angle, or so it seems. You've got to be consistent and rigorous. You've got to have fairness, and you've got to be the person in control. You have to be the adult who is leading the lifestyle. And if you lose control to your child, you genuinely have handed the baton over to an inappropriate person. So you've got to get that control back. You've got to be the adult who is the leader. You've got to be firm but fair, and you've got to manage your own temper, no matter what is thrown at you, what buttons are pressed. Now that comes in a mnemonic of craft: consistency, rigor, adult leadership, firm but fair, temper management. It's all on the paper on control on our website. There's a book that I work with a hell of a lot called 1, 2, 3 Magic. And we've recommended 2-3 books already this evening. 1, 2, 3 Magic is both a course and a book on control and controlling a child with ADHD in an appropriate manner. Control isn't about shouting out loud. Control isn't about being the domestic loudest voice. It's more subtle than that, a lot more subtle. So I would recommend, my thing to take away is your craft of parenting a child with ADHD, and build your awareness through 1, 2, 3 Magic. It's a really easy read. It's a cracking read, and you can get courses nationally and locally on 1, 2, 3 Magic, which I guarantee will help you. Back to you, boss.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, guys. We've got 2 minutes left and we're doing really well on our time management skills tonight. So often we run over on these. There's so many unanswered questions in the chat. I'm really sorry, everybody. We wish we had hours and hours to stay with you online tonight and answer all of these. If you do have any questions, I'm just about to put in the chat our email address at Connections in Mind, info@connectionsinmind.co.uk. Email us. We're really happy to help you in any way we can, or point you in the right direction of what services can support you. And I'm sure the same goes for Lisa and Phil as well, to get in contact. We're here to support. We do this because we're absolutely passionate about leveling the playing field for young people and adults who are struggling with challenges with their neurodiversity, their executive functioning, their ADHD, their dyslexia, their dyspraxia, autism, the list goes on and on. We really want to see a world where everyone is appreciated for their diversity, and that people really understand these young people are just humans just trying to do the best like everyone else. And we really want to see a future like that. So closing comments from Lisa and Phil, please.
Well, have a good summer, really. Spend it chilling and having lots of time outdoors with your kids, lots of laughter, lots of fun. Just, you know, be gentle to yourself. It's been one heck of a year. So, yeah, spend it having fun. That's my closing comment.
I think I would just encourage everybody. Vicky Salloway, you've cracked it. I am actually on holiday. Thank you for that comment. There's just a cheeky comment in the sidebar there. for me, it is have faith. Don't ever give up, because I've never yet met a patient that we can't turn their life around and get them towards achieving their potential. And you know, if these webinars are anything to you like the webinars we professionally attend, I need to listen to them 3 or 4 times before I absorb everything that's been put forward. So Victoria's team will circulate the webinar tomorrow or the next day with a link to re-listen to it, and keep going back to it. Use it as much as you can. If it's of any use to you at all, it sounds a bit arrogant saying you must go back to it, but if it's of any use to you at all, don't forget that it's there to go back to. We've covered a hell of a lot of complex stuff tonight, but I, like Lisa, enjoy your summer break. For those of you who've got one, don't make it into a battle. Don't make it into a battleground for 6 weeks. Make it into the best experience that your child can have, and set them ready for September to go back to school in the new world.
Thanks so much, everyone. It's been lovely having you here this evening. We're going to say good night.